passionate evening about memory and in conversation with memory. I just wanted to start off by thanking our sponsors, the Art Bridges Foundation, Utah Humanities, the Diane and Sam Stewart Family Foundation, and SAP. And I also wanted to thank our board. We often forget to just acknowledge our board of trustees. We have our board president here tonight, Rich Walchi, and thank you to our board who, through their leadership and support and guidance, helped make us strong. Thank you all for coming. I'm Allred Hurtado. I'm the executive director. I also was the curator of this exhibition in memory. And I want to start off sort of laying the evening out. I'm going to describe kind of the origin of the show and what kind of what the thinking was. And then we'll have Ryan Habermeyer, who is an artist and an author in the show, first introduce himself and then talk about his project. And then we'll have a panel with four of the artists. We'll introduce them then. I think that makes sense. And then we'll serve dinner. And you know, this is an experiment, right? So we have to kind of, you know, be flexible with us. So food will be served through those doors, and then you'll come back and just eat it on your chair here. And then when we move to the panels, you'll pick up your chair and move to where you want to go, and we'll kind of walk you through that when we get to that section. Thank you again. Thanks all for coming. When I first started working on this exhibition, the original idea was to explore the rise of surrealism and dreamscapes in the 21st century, and to kind of explain it as it related to this eerie and strange social and environmental climate we find ourselves in. But then I saw this exhibition in Venice 2 years ago called The Milk of Dreams, and it was so beautiful that there was no point doing something in that vein. Like there was no point replicating it. And so I was left sorting through what had drawn me to that subject in the first place, and I really wasn't sure. And then a few months later, a friend died suddenly, and he was 42, and he had a wife and 3 children, and it was this sort of disorienting, difficult thing to process. And I was, as so many of us were, left with a lot of unanswered and unanswerable questions. And we gathered as friends to mark that moment and to mark his life. And as we did so, we dug through all these old shoeboxes and, you know, Kodak duplicates, and we found like this old chemistry test that he had written a bunch of snarky notes on and had failed grandly and beautifully, and notes we had passed in the library, and scraps of a life lived that we tried to search for clues beneath these scanned objects, and looking for a version of ourselves that no longer existed, and a version of our friend that no longer we recognized. And one of the treasured remnants was this cassette tape of old voice messages that he had left. And we had recorded them because they were stupid and because they were funny. But the recordings were like these phantoms that echoed in our ear, and left us with the ability to time travel to the past, where his voice was still playful and still alive, and it was haunting. And writing extensively about memory and exploring the archive in particular, Maria Stefanova, in her seminal book, In Memory of Memory, says there's something macabre in the very youthfulness of the recorded voices, which floats above both the tombs and the heaps of paper and the concert programs, as if nothing had happened, as if all beings were immutable and immortal. And I thought about this youthful recorded voices and objects holding an immortality in memorial. And then I started to ask, what does it mean to remember, or to be erased like the soft stone ivory graves that I pass in the city cemetery? What does it mean to be weathered away and dissolved with time? And there's this really haunting passage in the seminal book, Pedro Paramo, where he says, nothing lasts forever. There's not a single memory, no matter how intense, that won't fade eventually. So it was this tension between wanting to hold on and also knowing that things erase. And the only type of immortality that an exhibition could offer is a kind of preservation of things. I mean, museums are also, you know, Robert Smithson called them mausoleums, right? They are keepers of stories, they're keepers of history. And in that spirit of saving, or kind of secular salvation, came the early seeds of this exhibition, and many conversations about the role of remembering and holding on and making vigil and keeping archives, and a desperate need to counter Pargo's promise of erasure. So through my research, I wondered about the role of subjectivity of remembering, both as individuals and as communities and as countries, as we continue to ask ourselves who we are and why we are as it relates to our memories and as it relates to our stories. And I was struck continually with the way that the past takes on new and revised meanings as the future changes and as it's imprinted with future versions, kind of like a retrograde foreshadowing. And I read a lot about memory and found it everywhere, in podcasts and short stories and essays and books. And when I looked at the object list that I had been forming for the show about surrealism, actually the through line was memory from the very beginning. So I didn't actually need to change my list terribly much. I was particularly kind of haunted and struck by the notion that memories are ephemeral, subjective, malleable, and fleeting, and despite our deepest desire to hold on to them. And this reality felt both true and kind of depressing. And so to remember is not clearly a concrete act where one kind of accesses a data file, but it's always the very proteins in your brain are changed. And so in that way, and in that spirit, remembering is a creative act. And so artists felt like the most important to respond to an idea about memory and about remembering. So this exhibition is roughly organized around 3 central themes: the document, the remnant, and the ghost. And they kind of float above the exhibition in this kind of liminal space. I didn't want to kind of diagnose each work according to each theme. I wanted them to kind of stay above. And it explores the deep human need not only to cling tightly to the stories and experiences that we have, but also to investigate the way our histories, at least in fragments, scatter and fade, and the way about this kind of limbo or bardo state that our memories existed and our identities existed. It's also what makes the work themselves so, in so many ways, personal and intimate and thoughtful. I've curated a lot of shows, and I've never curated such a personal show. I've never started an artist talk off with, a really personal story like this. But I think the strength of the collective work is precisely in that eagerness and in its honesty and its vulnerability and in its real investigation about connection and loss and absence and presence. And what has been most meaningful for me as a curator is in taking people through the exhibition, they always, everyone stops and they tell me about their own storage of objects and their acid-tinted memories and their loved ones that can no longer be found. And so in that sense, this show touches on something both profoundly personal and universally resonant. Not indulgent, not sentimental, but something more tangible and something more human. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I'm very honored to introduce Ryan Habermeyer, who will talk about his project, Necronauts. He's a professor at Salisbury University, also an old friend. Thanks.
Old friend is an interesting way of talking about it, and if anyone wants some stories afterwards about Laura, I'd be happy to share them. She told me to dress like an adult tonight, and obviously I got the memo. Really wishing I would have got those bifocals now. But thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak tonight and to say a few words and to give a little bit of a reading and context for my contribution to the exhibit. Thanks to all the staff at the museum, and thanks obviously to you for coming out to here. I admit I feel a little bit out of my element here. I feel much more at home in a bookstore, in the literary world. Not to say that I don't love museums and I don't love art, and that I increasingly, as of late, have been much more interested in the intersections visual and language and the words and the way that those two things cross over to one another and cross-pollinate one another in really interesting ways. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about my project and how it fits into the scope of the exhibition, and I'll read a few of the excerpts from my work. So, but fittingly, to start off with, I want to start with a memory. So this memory is, I think about 4 or 5 years old, and I was at my father's dentist office, and we had gone there to, he was showing me, it was late at night, and he'd gone there to show me just like all the weird tools that dentists have, you know, like the drills, the hooks, the scalers, the bristles, like all this stuff that's like nightmare fuel for like me as a child. And I remember he had like this huge wall of plaster teeth, you know, from the impressions that they take. And it was like really formative in my mindset. And he showed me where he developed the x-rays way back in the day before they were all digital. And I remember going in there, and I can remember the chemical smell of the mixing solutions. And I remember my dad has these like really hairy knuckles. Don't ask me why I remember this stuff, but I do. And like the red glow of the light. And then I remember watching the x-ray come to life, so to speak, and sort of appear. It was my own mouth, it was my own smile. And I was looking back at it, and it had this real magical quality, even as it was sort of frightening and strange at the same time. And I remember I got scared, and I pushed open the door. My dad yelled at me, because he's like, oh no, you're gonna ruin the photo, you're gonna ruin the x-ray. And that's why I want to share that, is because this idea of ruin, and a ruined memory, and a ruined photograph. Because I think before I had a love affair with books and with words, I had a deep love affair with pictures and with photographs because of this. And so many years ago, I started collecting vintage photography. I would go to estate sales and antique shops. Found a really great place you can get them is on Etsy, where you can just order like a big bundle, and it's sort of like Christmas, and they surprise you with just like all these old photographs that they've collected. But the ones that I really love, these found photographs, I love the ruined ones. I love the botched photographs, the ones that, you know, they have the light leaks or the backscatter, or the ones that have like chemical burns and smears and are shadowed. Like, I'm really drawn to these in a kind of fascinating way. One of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson, one of her poems has this really famous line, which is, I like a look of agony. And in that poem, she's talking about pain, and she's talking about the authenticity of pain, of how pain is unmistakable, and how pain connects us as humans, and how you can't fake pain, ever. It's this real thing that you feel. And my small little revision to that, not really a revision, but an addendum, is I like a look of ruin. There's something aesthetically about ruin that I'm really drawn to and I'm really intrigued by. And so, especially so in this day and age of artificial intelligence and Photoshop and digital cameras, where every picture it seems you take is clean and pristine and perfect. And that's nice, but in a way, I find it kind of sterile and lifeless at the same time, and I really miss those old photographs that you had to take time to develop, and that you don't really know how they might have turned out, like when you start to develop them. There's a Japanese fashion designer, and I'm going to totally botch his name, Yohji Yamamoto, who said, I think perfection is ugly. Somewhere in the things humans make, I want to see scars, failure, disorder, and distortion. And I really feel a kinship, an artistic kinship with that idea, that ruined things are very human, that we are deeply flawed and sort of ruinous creatures. And they have, ruined things have style, they have grit, they have wonder, they have character, they have a mystery quality to them. And I'm reminded of another of my favorite poets, Federico Garcia Lorca, a Spanish poet, who said, only mystery allows us to live, only mystery. So my project is rooted in that idea of finding these old photographs and wanting to do something with them, wanting to find the story within them. Or not so much the story, but a story within them, because there's never just one story, there's always multiple stories. And so I started writing these little narratives of looking at the photographs, or sometimes I would write the story first and then go hunting to see if I could find a photograph that would sort of be a companion to the narrative. And the more and more that I wrote them, the more and more it felt like I was having a conversation with dead things, with dead people, because the period that I'm really interested in photography is about 1920s, 1930s. And so it was kind of like this literary ventriloquist act that I was doing of trying to find the story within these photos and bringing them to life. And so I changed. When I made that realization, like, oh, okay, these are stories about the dead, I started writing all the narratives as obituaries. And so I started reading like all these different obituaries, this history of obituary writing. And so if you see in my exhibit, and the way that I've structured the book, is they all begin with the same refrain, which is, it is with sadness we communicate. And I use that because as I read all these obituaries, that is the most common refrain that begins every obituary. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of so-and-so. And I thought that was really fascinating and interesting, and a kind of poetic irony at the same time that, communication is sadness, that words and even images never really live up to or can never fully communicate the things that we feel and the things that we experience. And there's a kind of beautiful paradox to that, I think, about being human and not being able to fully communicate. So that's kind of a framework. So I'll do a little bit of a reading of some of these. Some of them are ones that are in the exhibit, and some of them are just ones that I decided to share that aren't in the exhibit as well. So, it is with sadness we communicate the passing of the cosmonaut boy after a long illness. Nobody knew why he wore the spacesuit. It wasn't a cheap plastic toy or an old movie prop, but a thick globe 2 sizes too big for his head. The glass mottled in white like a soap-scummed fishbowl he'd stolen from the pet shop. He never took it off, like he was waiting to be abducted by aliens. Nobody knew what his face looked like. We said he'd been in an accident during a fallout drill in school, and we said that he was sick. We said that he was touching himself in the girls' bathroom at church and God cursed him. We said he was a Russian spy, or maybe a medical experiment gone wrong, but nobody knew for sure. There was a small bullet hole in the helmet's left side where his cheek would have been. Milky cracks radiated from the hole like spider webs. Nobody knew if he'd been shot or if he shot himself. Nobody remembered when he was born. It was like he'd always been part of our town, our ghost, the canker in our mouths that we licked, hoping it would go away, but never did. All my life has been a head full of stars, he spoke with his fingers. Nobody believed it. Nobody knew his name, so we called him Nobody. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of an unidentified man who leapt from the highway overpass into oncoming traffic. A produce truck swerved to avoid the falling man and then flipped, spilling hundreds of cantaloupes onto the highway. The truck driver and his son were ejected from the vehicle during the collision. While their bodies have since been recovered, both father and son were decapitated, their heads catapulted onto the highway and lost among the scattered fruit. Volunteers continue to comb the surrounding brush, prying back tall grasses in search of the wayward remains. Despite the horrible accident, the annual fruit festival continued as planned. A new cantaloupe queen was crowned. The boys gathered outside her window and said she stayed up all night in her orange dress with a white sash, practicing her wave, imagining how she would smile at the crowd from the parade float as she bit into cantaloupe slices. These are a little dark, sorry. they get a little funnier later, sorry. I'm trying to warm me up here, so. I mean, it's death, people, right? Okay. You have to laugh in the face of death, all right. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of the chef who used to bring us foraging with her in the canyon, scouring under mesquite as we nibbled here and there on wild mushroom breeds. She showed us how to find them at night, their mushroom caps poking through the soil and peering over the grass like shy alien UFOs. She knew which ones caused drowsiness or euphoria or hallucinations. She knew how to squeeze them just right until they leaked an eerie green bioluminescence. Luciferin, she called the chemical that produced it, like the devil Lucifer, the light bringer gone stray. At the library, she showed us an old medieval book on display under thick glass, each page beautifully ornamented with letters and pictures. There's a mushroom, she said, almost translucent as glass, and once picked, it dissolves into a black juice that monks used to use for ink. The Morchella relicta, the weeping mushrooms of immortality. A silly name, the chef laughed, but warned us that the ink was actually corrosive. As it aged, it sunk into the manuscript paper and like an insatiable tongue, soaked the fibers, spreading until the whole page stained black. Entire libraries were lost like this. Some of the books were burned to prevent contamination, and others clasped shut and hidden deep in the monasteries. Who knows how many other books are out there, written in this strange ink, she used to tell us, waiting for someone to open them, for the ink to run off the page, the words spilling down the streets in a black river of calligraphy. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of the acclaimed rodeo clown. His estranged son, given up for adoption as a child, found him yesterday and remains visibly shaken. Father and son had, it seems, after many years of cautious communication, finally agreed to meet at the hotel. The son knew very little about his clown father, only that he was the youngest child of a master clown famous in Moldovan carnivals. Those who have seen the blurry photographs say the son's grandfather sits in a chair surrounded by his 9 sons, their faces painted and expressionless, making it impossible for anyone to know which of them is the son's father. Not long after the photograph was taken, the grandfather banished his son from the community for teaching the clandestine and now extinct clown language to a woman from a non-clowning family. This is not biographical, by the way. The two married and fled to America. The son found his father drowned in the hotel bathtub. His face was painted in the customary tramp style. Worried someone might think poorly of him in that condition, the son tried in vain to clean his father's clown face, only to discover what he believed was clown makeup was actually the old man's real skin. His father had spent a lifetime applying paints and powders and resins when he was not performing to mask his natural clown face. All right, a little more lighthearted. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of the zookeeper. His neighbors had for some time complained of the lingering odor of wild animals in his apartment. But what troubled the zookeeper and his wife was the vintage chandelier the previous tenant had illegally installed. It dangled from the ceiling with crystal bulbs and twisted candelabra that looked like octopus tentacles. It hung so low that to pass through the room to his favorite armchair, the zookeeper had to crane his neck at an awkward angle to avoid knocking his head against the chandelier. To make matters worse, the electrical wiring was poor and constantly short-circuited. And when the zookeeper tried to fix the wiring, he only succeeded in mildly electrocuting himself, much to the dismay of his wife. During these electrical outages, their increasingly embittered relationship was only salvaged by torrid sessions of intercourse. After his wife unexpectedly died last year, the zookeeper discovered that every time he walked into the room, he became aroused, recalling the previous romances on the floor, and he had to sit in the armchair until he was no longer flustered. But the pain of such memories encouraged the zookeeper to dispose of both the armchair and the chandelier. Recently, though, the zookeeper walked around the room and, without thinking, craned his neck as if the chandelier was still there, after which he became aroused and attempted to sit in the absent armchair. Returning from the hospital with a fractured coccyx, he walked through the room and, without thinking, craned his neck once more and attempted to sit once again in the absent armchair. It took several days before the neighbors phoned the authorities, assuming the noises coming from the apartment. Sorry, I've never read this out loud before. That's a writer's note. You should always do that before you read it out loud the first time. Sorry, where was I? Before the neighbors phoned the authorities, assuming the noises coming from the apartment were from the sadness of a grieving widower, or another wild animal the zookeeper had rescued, or their minds were playing tricks on them, or in the very least they thought it was a ghost. The zookeeper celebrated his most recent release with a game of Mormon basketball. Dead of a heart attack, he was 62. Are you regretting me asking the I got two more, so. It is with sadness we communicate the unexpected death of the jury member, and as such must postpone selection of the prize-winning performance at this year's Marks Jubilee. We ask for patience in this difficult time. Each spring, as everybody knows, fifth grade students all over our state perform reenactments of Karl Marx's little-known visit to Utah in 1875. He'd come at the behest of Brigham Young, who helped to convince the eccentric German that evangelical capitalism is the ideal economic system, but Marx was more interested in seeking a cure at the sanatorium for his hemorrhoids. The reenactments have grown in popularity over the years, and competition is fierce. The jury selects the best performance to send to the International Mart Festival in Trier, Germany. Gracious funding for the lucky winner is provided by the Le Moist Toilet Paper Corporation, whose factory is the oldest employer in our town. As every child who passes through our esteemed public education system knows, when the 9 founding polygamous families established our town, there was nothing but sand and sagebrush. Pretty soon, these pioneers were abridging the lyrics of a favorite hymn to reflect their angst. Come, come, ye saints, no toilet paper here, not even grass to wipe your ass. Years later, a local chemist engineered a new formula to manufacture toilet paper from sand. It was known as the Gentle Gentile Bath Tissue Company for almost 100 years, until recently it was purchased by an international Japanese conglomerate who changed the name because French sounds more sophisticated. These new Le Moist toilet paper rolls are not moist at all, but come in a variety of scents for whatever kind of anus you want. Peach, orange, peppermint, licorice, and so on. They have fancy names like Merlot with Night Sky and Lemon Drop Island. Jeez. I should really stop. Personally, we prefer the old Sandy style and the billboard just outside of town that says, "Don't stop excreting," which should only be said with gusto to the tune of Journey's "Don't Stop Believing." A statue of Marx sitting on the toilet outside the factory was donated by the good citizens of Trier during the 1950s Red Scare with the inscription, "Love thy neighbor, because even communists poop." Tours are open to the public Monday through Thursday and come with a variety of free toilet paper, some cents excluded. All right, last one. This is the last one. This is actually the first one I ever wrote, and it's the first one that starts off the book. It is with sadness we communicate the passing of the old woodcutter, who reminds us that to die in Utah is a housekeeping concern. Our pioneer ancestors understood this. They welcomed summer passings, knowing that under conditions of such dry, salty heat, the soul is quick to breach its housing contract as the body shrivels into dust. But death in winter is precarious, especially in the desert where temperatures are savage and this world touches another. A century ago, winter corpses waiting for the ground to thaw and left outdoors were easily dragged off by wild animals, while those kept in an attic or spare room for safekeeping often forgot they were dead and wandered about the house prone to mischief. Such was the dilemma our town faced many years ago when burying the woodcutter's boy claimed by the typhoid epidemic. The mayor had placed a moratorium on burials on account of the ice storm, which rendered all grave digging equipment inoperable. But the woodcutter, son of a woodcutter with mustard gas still rattling in his lungs, would not be dissuaded. He consulted the town charter which indicated that in the event of inclement weather, the bereaved may petition the local bishop for a stick of dynamite and a shovel. Who can forget the excellent blast it produced on the frozen earth? True, the cemetery caretaker had forgotten to move the coffin, and the dynamite scattered the poor boy's remains into the sky. But Germans exiled in the desert turn remarkably optimistic because catastrophe is the curious balm of faith. The woodcutter rallied the congregation into a scavenger hunt to collect the missing pieces of his son, which in the years since has evolved into the annual spring festival where neighbors emerge from domestic hibernation and considerable jello is consumed. A year after his catastrophe, the woodcutter
opened a crematorium downtown, hoping to spare others his misfortune. While the faithful considered it an abomination, nobody could deny the ingenuity of the woodcutter who pioneered peephole windows on all the furnace ovens, so grieving family members could watch the process. The crematorium closed a few months ago after decades of mismanagement, and the property has since been renovated into a pizzeria. The grand opening was a success. On cold nights, we often walk past the family building, hypnotized by the neon lights, and we followed the perfume of basil and marinara into the alley, as we peer through the window slits to eavesdrop on neighbors, but mostly to admire the wisp of smoke billowing into the streets, leaning against the brick walls, whose warmth offers a strange, silent relief. Thank you for coming to this event.
I'm Cara Despain, and I'm born and raised in Salt Lake City, and I split time now between here and Miami, which would be more opposite. And my work is still really kind of like centered on the West and kind of the like ethos and psychic residue of the Western landscapes. So being in two different places is a pretty interesting nut for me to crack in terms of communicating those ideas. Yes, it's on the other side of this. It's the uranium glass and the infinity cabinet.
Great. And those that are standing, there's seats up here. So come and get comfortable.
Hi, I'm Julia Jacquette, visiting from New York City, and my works are the oil paintings that depict 3 calendar pages.
My name is Leah Moses. I'm a mom and an artist and a midwife, and I enjoy water birth. And mine are the fetal movement drawings to the right.
Hi there, I'm Mike Womack. I live in Colorado, but interestingly, 20 years ago, I used to live in Salt Lake City. I used to come to this very facility when I was in the Salt Lake City Art Center. I'm a painter and a sculptor, and I make other things as well, and I have the drawings that are embedded in the concrete slabs on the other side of this wall.
Hey, great, thank you. It's such an honor to have 5 artists in the show here tonight, and so happy to have you all here. I wanted to start off by asking, all of your work, I think, has a real kind of, comes from a real personal place. So I wanted to maybe ask if you could talk about that subjectivity or that personal narrative and how that functions in your work. And whoever wants to jump first.
I'll start off. So the paintings of calendar pages are paintings of my mom's calendar pages, and she has dementia and is very much, though, trying to hold on to control of her life with her calendar pages, and always has. She had those month-at-a-glance calendars my entire life, and if you spend some time with them, you'll see there's a lot this down? Did you do that thing that is the day before? And her saying, oh, there's so many cross-outs, and me saying, there's whiteout, use whiteout, and having this incredible, I'm so grateful that she uses this system still, and it is sort of, these pages became and still are sort of the axis that our relationship revolves around, and this thing that I feel holds our family life together. So that's a bit about my work.
I guess I'll go next. I've made some sculptures here that are reluctantly really personal. I was really interested in some passages I had found regarding how the brain orients to memory and how some new research was revealing our knowledge about memory isn't what we thought it was. And I was just absolutely fascinated by that, and very cursorily made a plan to go ahead and make some artwork about that. And my memories were the most readily available, or at least the thing to just, for me, was obvious to use as material. Thinking that I was making this work about science, and I've since discovered that whenever I've interacted with people, the thing they were most fascinated about was this kind of personal narrative. And I've struggled with knowing how to talk about that. And then I've also come to realize that perhaps one of the more interesting things about myself, as I look at myself, is that tension between me not wanting to discuss that personal narrative and at the same time wanting to explore it as an intellectual idea and as a creative idea. And so now I'm attempting to kind of lean into more personal work of that sort.
Okay. So I think at a glance, without reading the caption next to my work, I don't even know that they're fetal movement drawings. But about 18 years ago, I was 7 months pregnant, and I was standing in my graduate studio, desperate for some kind of thesis to emerge. And as I looked around at all of the work that I had made, I had drawn on the walls, I had painted over the drawings, I had drawn again, I had painted again, I had wire sculptures, and there's just stuff everywhere. And then I felt him move, and it was like everything then came together for me. So I think, in a long story short, I spent about a month drawing his movements, and it would, at that point in pregnancy, that gestational age, the fetus is, large enough to really make an impact. You can wheel side to side, up and down, small movements, and then, but yet still small enough to move around. So, I felt very alone. I was pregnant in graduate school, pregnant not of my own choosing, and living with a partner who was overtly challenging me in every way that I possibly could imagine. And as I was experiencing that and wondering, what was coming of my life, I wanted so much to give something to this baby, and so we made work together, and that was part of this larger thesis that I titled Maternicity, which was a word that I found in an old nursing journal that had to do with transferred from the coated paper to this handmade paper, which took quite a long time. And so part of that, you kind of infer all the ideas about maternal identity that's tied to like, the kinesthetic quality of being a parent and all of the things that you do with your hands, the many task-oriented kind of days and nights that I spent. So this product that you see was created after he was born, but the drawings themselves and those images were the ones that we made together. And I think maybe one of the reasons why Laura might have invited me to join the show was because the other layer of the work that is not posted on the wall is that he's gone. And as a mother, it's been really challenging for me to bring this out of its archive. It hasn't been shown anywhere. I've given a few pieces away to close friends. I auctioned one off with a midwife group, but no one actually knew the real backstory to it. So they've come out of hibernation, I suppose, out of this archive. Just before his 16th birthday, his dad murdered him, and it was like a close-range firearm situation. And I always thought it would be me. I expected that. That was what he said he would do, and that's what I expected. And luckily, my daughter was spared, so I have another living child, and a wonderful partner now who is very different, and not even the opposite. I couldn't even compare. And 4 bonus children, and so I feel like that identity of me as a mother is not something that I usually walk around with on my face and portray, because I work with mothers, and so in my professional life now as a clinician in women's health is very much directed towards others' experiences. But I have to say that I have never had any prenatal visit that I've walked into and asked the mom, especially when in that late second and early third trimester, has your baby been moving? How does it feel? And that's kind of one of the general questions that you ask. There's the fundal height measurement and some of the Doppler talk about like if you have vaginal bleeding and that kind of thing. But my most cherished question that I ask in the clinic is your baby moving? Tell me more. And it comes back to this experience, that I had working together with my son to make these images. Probably a lot more, but that's enough for now. Thank you. Wow. So the work that's in this show is part of the bigger body of my work that's about nuclearism. And if many of you might be from this region, you might be familiar with the term downwinder. And my family is, my mom and my grandmother grew up in a small town in southern Utah that was the closest Utah town to the Nevada test site during the period of atmospheric testing of atomic bombs. And, without getting too far into that particular history, I have personal proximity to that by way of my family and some other connections to the development of the nuclear arsenal in many different directions and how that intersects with family and also victims. But without getting too far into that, this piece is actually weirdly personal to me, which I don't feel in that exact way that often with my work, but it's just antique uranium glass, and just to do a little side explanation of what that is, it actually was mass produced during the Depression era, the stuff that I collect, and it just happened to use uranium oxide as a colorant, so that gives it that bright green quality, or that bright green color, and it happens to fluoresce in UV light, although I don't think that was like part of the plan. It's just the Depression era glass, they were coloring it with all different types of stuff. And as I was researching kind of the more insidious, direct history of the very sort of knowing I spoke on a panel about this topic for another show that I had, and all of us that were about my age we came away with that saying we're haunted by it. And I don't know what that means for memory. I don't know what it means for like the psychic imprint. There's also like a very, very real radioisotopic imprint on every living thing on the planet. I don't know if that could be like a science-y haunting, but it's just like very there. And when I made that piece, it came out being my exact height. I don't know if I necessarily planned that, but it just did like it's kind of I don't know, it's just like bodily in this way that I didn't expect, and it just surprised me.
Yeah, thank you. I think, what you all sort of touched on is this, one, the way that memories are imprinted in some of the materialities that you chose, and also this tension between like beauty and hauntingness that shows up, I think, in all of your work. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about how the material helped inform the work or was part of the memory, and maybe also that notion of beauty and haunting and how that works or plays out in the work?
And I'll start. So I'm using a very time-consuming medium, oil paint, and in some ways it's nutty that I'm painting these images. I could, right, photograph them, make big, beautiful prints of them, but doing this time-consuming process really puts me in, right, I'm like sitting in my mom's place and writing, although I'm using a teeny brush to make the imagery, and it forces me in a good way, because I love it, to think about her and to think about the information that's being depicted. And it's also this historic homage to these paintings, a lot of them made in the US in the 1900s and the 1800s, these trompe-l'oeil, fool-the-eye paintings that depicted the forerunners, I guess you'd say, of bulletin boards. So paintings of notes thumbtacked into a wall with keys hanging from some of the thumbtacks. And there was a big show at the Metropolitan Museum about a year and a half ago where they had a lot of those. And although I'd always loved those paintings, that tradition of painting. So it's a nod to that tradition, and also an adamantly saying, like, I am choosing the slowest, most analog way of making these images. And little sidebar, and if anybody wants to talk about color mixing, I'm a color mixing dork in painting. I love it. I'm intentionally using the two colors I'm squeezing out are kind of totally inappropriate or very modern colors, and I have to work really hard to make browns and grays and blacks. But I kind of like that, tying my feet together in a way to walk along and make them.
I guess we'll stay in order so
Yeah.
far.
I like that we have a checkerboard.
Yeah.
It's like relaxing for me. That's the first in line.
I can talk about the materials I use, which were just charcoal on paper and then concrete. I cast the drawings into concrete, and I guess the reason why I chose those materials is more procedural, so now I'll talk about the process. The research that I had discovered and read about in terms of 10 years ago anyways, where the science was with regards to how neuroscientists were understanding memory is functioning in our mind, was kind of upending classically how we understood memory to function, which you alluded to a little bit, Laura. It's not that we just go back into the file cabinet of our mind and pull out a memory and recall it in that moment and revisit the truth of that. It's more the case that we have a brand new experience that's wearing the clothes of a memory and feels like it's a memory, though it's basically a brand new event. And the researchers that were studying this were led to a couple conclusions, and this one series of quotes stuck with me with this one researcher who said, if there was any truth in what a memory is, the truth exists in the mind that remembers it a fewer amount of times. So the more you remember it, the more you essentially make a Xerox copy of it, and it becomes contaminated with more and more current ideas. And then this researcher concluded, and I'm paraphrasing, that the most truthful memories are minds that are trapped inside the brain of someone who can't recall them. I took that to mean that if there was any truth to our older idea about a memory it was ruined when it was made conscious. So I made all of these drawings of my earliest memories while under hypnosis with a hypnotherapist in a darkened room such that neither me nor the hypnotherapist or anyone would ever see them or know what they were. We did a series of meditative exercises after I made them so that I wouldn't recall having made them, and then I cast them into these blocks of concrete. So the material choice of concrete was specifically to kind of entomb these in this surrogate, and were you to try to get at any of these drawings, they would be ruined in the process of pulling them out of the concrete. So the materials for me really followed thinking about that kind of nugget of the science and thinking what an object might be like that's not merely illustrating that science, but
most of the pieces actually worked. I didn't have to redo too many, and I made hundreds of sheets of paper. And so when you walk by, they're so thin that they'll move at the slightest change in, I suppose the HVAC system, or you might have noticed that as you walk by if you were sitting on this side. But as they were all hung at abdomen height originally, we decided to double stack those here just to give a little bit more context and a few more images to look at. But the idea was that you would experience some kind of subtle movement and an echo of what I had experienced as well. And we did a short, small walkthrough and talk I guess 2 weeks ago, and I invited some other midwives and other birth workers to come. And one of the OBs that noticed the images asked me specifically, like, was that really how it felt? And she was talking about one of the ones that has like several different marks on the bottom. And yes, it was those like small movements of that heel, like bang, 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 bang. And so I think that the quality of the materials did come together in the way that I originally intended. And there's that gain-loss binary of where even though he is gone now, we actually couldn't ever, there's no way that he could bring back his memory of that I know of, and that we could ever talk about this experience together anyway, so it remains really my memory. And then there was not really a time, because of the rest of the experience between the time that I made those drawings and the time that he died, that there was really a moment where we can really sit down and talk about maybe the theory behind it, because so much of our life together was just about survival. There really was no time to add sizing to anything. We just had to go with what we had. And that overworking of the fiber, I think I look back now and realize it was me trying to put my all into this like task and identity of being a mother. What is a good mother? What does that look like? And now they exist in and of themselves as something completely new and different than I probably ever would have imagined that they would happen.
I said a bit about what the uranium class is, but I guess I can explain some of the quirkier parts of acquiring it. I started going to some antique glass shows, which, the uranium glass is its own thing, and then there's like people that just really geek out on like antique glass in general. They did start making uranium glass as early as the Victorian era, and that stuff is really awesome. But I chose to focus on the kind of like Art Deco / Depression era because it felt to me, and most of the stuff that I was getting is like American glass makers, and it just felt like, and it's mold cast. Like I actually also like cast concrete and stuff. Sometimes it's more labor intensive, so it's like kind of weird and interesting to be working with found objects. But you can see the like they pour the molten glass into molds, and they do various things with it. And to me, that just like starts to talk about mass production, and it connects to all these like dorky art history things too. But then there's like this other interesting part of empire building that I started to like about the glass, and it felt like there was just this like hopeful kind of moment of like building up. They also used to put like depression glass, not just uranium glass, but depression glass objects in cereal boxes during depression to like cheer people up. If you can imagine, and then like you could collect them and have a set and have like some cute colored dishes to kind of like brighten your life. It was probably kind of shitsville at the time. So I was very interested in just like all of the troublesome stuff that was just like buried in the glass anyway. And then I recently went to Prague, and like I didn't fully understand this, but like Bohemia was the birth of decorative glass and like uranium glass in particular. So I got like this whole other education about like what it meant for design, and it was just like, to me, even though it's just like dishes, it's just this like it makes this point so succinctly for me with this particular body of work. And with these pieces that are in this cabinet, and Infinity Mirror, I'm
So, yeah.
I'll add
Thank
that.
you.
So, chatting with Mike last night and looking at his piece yesterday during the day, having some time with it, with the concrete and paper pieces, I told him I sort of feel like his sculptures are my mom's mind. Like they're these memories that she can no longer access, that are entombed. And that was just a very, well, I mean, I will add, I myself am a art professor, and that would be the kind of wonderful moment that I would say to my students, that, you know, like, oh wow, in this exhibition, there's this connection here. But yeah, that was a really moving moment for me, that to have your work be this connective piece. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for that, Julia. I recall you saying that, and something I didn't tell you at the time was while I was, and I didn't exactly know this circumstance of you, but while I was working on this very project, this was over, I think, like 11 or 12 years ago now, I was taking care of my mother who had dementia. And so I was reading about the brain and reading about how this time component, this temporal piece about this preservation, and the more you engage with it, the more it's lost. While taking care of my mother, who seemingly could access decades prior to that moment quite readily and easily, because her mind was failing her, and lose everything that happened that day. And so, yeah, that's something I didn't know.
That's what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that.
Thank you for breaking order. I really appreciate it. I'm adding a question we didn't talk about, and I was reading this scholar, Svetlana Boyan, wrote extensively about nostalgia. Nostalgia is, was originally clinically defined as like a medical diagnosis of like intense homesickness, and a kind of a longing to return home. But she, in kind of her kind of framework, defines it as a longing for a home that no longer exists or has never existed, and talks about it as a kind of sentimentality of loss or displacement, and also calls it a romance with one's own fantasy of memory, in a really beautiful way. And then she continues by talking about nostalgia appearing to be a longing for a place, but it's actually a yearning for a different time, a time of our childhood, the slower rhythms of our dreams. When I read that, I was like, oh, see, that's the surrealism. Like, it's there still. And the broader sense, nostalgia is a rebellion against a kind of modern idea of time, or a time of history or progress. Like in some ways, like you're insisting, like, I have this friend who's saying, like, oh, like my partner's really nostalgic, so we do the same things, but that means we stay doing the same things. And so there's both like a plus and a minus to nostalgia. So I guess using Boyan's framework, and I want to kind of expand it beyond your work, but talk about the larger exhibition, how you see nostalgia at play in either the materials or the works themselves, or maybe just talk about your angsty feelings about nostalgia, or your love of it. Go. Out of order.
Well, one of my, I'm just going back into order. Would anybody like to start it? Okay. As an art student at a summer art school, there was a major, very popular artist at the time who came in to do a group critique, and we all had our works around this barn, and he came in and said, nostalgic, 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 and we're all like shaking in our boots, and he almost got up to mine, but somebody interrupted him. And yeah, I was like, that could have been said about mine too. And so I sort of feel that a big part of all my bodies of work is just embracing nostalgia and just saying it's anything to do with memory, it's gonna be there. Even if the take on it is critical, you're still, it's just inherent in any kind of memory. So,
Why do people hate on nostalgia so hard in contemporary art, by the way? Because like in culture we insist on it, and like we're just obsessed about it in like pop culture and every other way. And like, you know, gonna be honest with y'all, cresting 40, it was like all the younger kids were like wearing everybody's experienced this in this room if you're over 30. But like then you start to see the nostalgia for what you grew up with coming back, but it feels too soon, and then you are in like a time loop. But then like some of the like bad stuff that you were like, oh, you're nostalgic for that, but you didn't even live through it, and then like I'm not even nostalgic for it because that kind of sucked. And I've also been and I've also been the young person that did that too. Like I've been on all sides of it, so I'm not trying to be ageist in any way, but it's just like a fascinating phenomenon that we're so impatient with it when it's in art, because I think it's like snotty, art historians or curators want to like say always that it's like this next door neighbor of sentimentality, and also so what if it is? But like, it's not always that. It's not only that. There's like so much more interesting. There's like stuff there to mine. But I'm glad you said that, because clearly it's been grinding my gears. I don't know, but it's so, we put it at the fore, like we're remaking every movie. We've done Ghostbusters a million times. Like we redid Mean Girls already. Like we're like insisting on nostalgia in every other realm except for contemporary art.
Yeah,
Can you solve that for us?
well, I mean, I said it was fun. I curated a show.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And you're welcome. Thank you. I actually, Julia, when we were saying like nostalgia, there's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where who's that guy that's like who's in that show that's like yeah, thank you, Danny DeVito, who walks around and he goes to a gallery and he says bullshit, derivatives. and I think critics do that all the time, and I
It's kind of spot on.
right. Right, I mean, yeah. I mean, feel it, like, it's funny because it's true sometimes, but also I think, sometimes you need permission to say, how can you just make a show that's sort of honest and open and personal and have that be a worthy investigation. And I think, I think you're walking a line sometimes with sentimentality, because you don't want cat videos and cute things.
You don't want to be only readable by you.
Yeah, you don't, and you don't want it to be reductive. I think it has to have these layers of depth and meaning that continue to yield. So, like one layer is maybe nostalgia, but another layer is loss or absence, or it has to continue to yield on these various levels. So it just can't stop there. But I think it's a useful portal, and I think it's a meaningful question.
heavy domestic violence in my home, and just, you know, being told your art is bullshit and you will never survive without me or resources or like all of that. And so to have all of that sort of weighing on me, and then have this group of academics who did not know that that was what I was living in because I couldn't even articulate it, and then have them tell me like, this is too sentimental, like you should not go to this place. Like as soon as I brought up any kind of terms that had anything to do with anything maternal, it was overtly like, we will not, like we're not doing that in this program, like you will not represent us this way, you'll never finish this thesis. Like, so this, like, I mean, the weight that I felt like I carried, and I was carrying weight at the same time too, was just like very intense. But I look back now and I think like, good for me at that age, good for me at that time. The person that I was then, I am somewhat now, no longer. I wish for, I long for, and I am really glad that I did not listen to them. And I have great respect for them as artists and as mentors, but I had to go my own way. And so I think that maybe we can consider that in our own nostalgia of our own lives, and the idea of like loss and regret, and all of that. We look back and think like, oh, I used to be this person and not this person. I never wanted anybody to find out about whatever I was before. But we are a product of our own experience, and the more that I think we can incorporate that and be truthful about our own nostalgia, about our own lives, the more true we can live now as the people that we are, and probably the more we can actually love the person that we are, and then in turn be able to be stable enough to give that to others.
And
Very nostalgic.
Someone remembers you being in that program though. You know, like that's like the looking from the other side of the wall. Like you being there, somebody out in the world remembers you, and that's important to them. And so like, shut up, you know, the ones that said you can't do this or that, because that is your experience. They only want you to do what you know, and that's what you knew.
Well, I think I understood that fear, right? I mean, I was being against the whole idea of like, can art be taught? And we're talking about me making work in an academic setting where it's like, can you teach art? Can you make art as a student? Is that really, you are an educator as well? And at the time I was an educator, and I stayed in education for just a little longer in art education. Like, how do you talk about work without making it personal in some way? Because whatever your brain comes up with and your own critique is going to be something of your personal experience, which is nostalgia.
Sure,
Or
I'll
do you
go.
not want to?
No, I'll go. Nostalgia is, for me, the primary operating system of how I listen to music, is the first thing that I think of.
Which is a big quality, right?
Yeah, and I like to mark moments of my life with music. So I'll go back and listen to music that I love that's horrible, but it's taking me back to this place.
Mike, are you listening to ska? Is that what you're saying?
Everyone has to say their shame song.
I want to tell you I have better taste than that. I don't, but I was not listening to stuff. But like, you know, bad 80s music. But it occurs to me that there is a strange prejudice in that
I'm giving this all 5 minutes to respond, so you'll get very deep, I imagine, all of you. Not 5 minutes each either, because people are hungry. People are hungry. People are hungry. But yeah, I guess I want to ask, and we talked about how nostalgia plays out in the show, but maybe how emotional memory plays out in the show, or plays out in your work, or I don't know what you think about emotional memory. Go.
Julia?
Well, I mean, my work couldn't be more emotional for me. So emotional memory, yes, that I'm all about it. And I just want to add about love that Toni Morrison quote. And a previous work of art that I made was a graphic memoir about being a kid and playing in playgrounds in New York City, modernist playgrounds. And I feel that quote is so connected to that. Don't have that work up in this show. It's easy to find online though. But yeah, unabashedly, like just about everything I do is about emotional